Welcome to you all. My name is Brennan Barnard. I am the Director of College Counseling and Outreach at the Derryfield School, which is an independent 6 through 12 day school in Manchester, New Hampshire. And I'm also the College Admission Program Advisor for the Making Caring Common project of the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And I will talk a little bit about that in a moment, but I want to introduce Diane Campbell and Eric DeAngelis and actually let them introduce themselves. Diane, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Diane Campbell. I am the Director of College Counseling at Liberty Common High School, nestled in smoky Fort Collins, Colorado. I have been here. It's a small public charter school for 4 years. And prior to that, I was at a large public high school in Fort Collins as well. My career has been from 7th grade to 12th grade, working and supporting students. And I'm just thrilled to see so many public high school counselors logging on too. Thanks for joining.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eric DeAngelis. I am Senior Associate Director of Admission at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. I've been in college admission for about 16, 17 years, and I've been at Brown for 10 years. Before that, I worked at my alma mater, the University of Rhode Island, in admissions, and I worked at Salve Regina University in Newport, Rhode Island for a few years before that. So my perspective I'm bringing today is from reading many tens of thousands of letters of recommendation over the years. So very happy you could be with us.
And again, I'm Brennan Barnard, and I have worked in both high school and college admission, and also in a number of different schools on the high school side. And I also mentioned my work with Making Caring Common. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Making Caring Common, like I said, it's a project of the Harvard Graduate School of Education and the authors of the Turning the Tide report, actually both reports. We'll talk a little more about that later. But the College Admission Initiative is just one part of Making Caring Common, and it's really an initiative looking at how to reduce excessive achievement pressure in college admission, how to reinforce ethical engagement and ethical character, and looking at how to level the playing field in admission, and looking at the messages college admission sends, and the role we have in helping guide young people and people of all ages to college. So we are thrilled to have you. We want to dig right in and talk about letters of recommendation. I know this is a busy time for you all, so thanks for joining us. This will be recorded, or it is being recorded, and we'll share it out afterwards for those of you who want to share it with others, and hopefully this will be a useful resource. We really encourage you to be engaged throughout this, and we'll ask you to throw some things in the chat from time to time, and then we'll end with some question and answers at the end. So welcome. And I will turn it over to Diane.
Yeah, so we just want to show you kind of our menu today, what we're going to cover, and really talk a little bit more about the purpose of the letters. But more importantly, I think it's really important for us all to talk about the reality that we've all faced in how are we supposed to write letters about kids we haven't seen. I've talked to a lot of friends and colleagues that are saying, I haven't seen some of my kids since 2019. And now I'm supposed to write these compelling letters of recommendation for students that I've had some touch points with. And then we're also going to share, as we all know, that's out there quite a bit, about the narrative bullet format that truly will, per Michelle Rasich, will change your life. And then how Eric's going to jump in as well and talk about how colleges utilize these letters. So, and just like Brendan mentioned, we really want this to be engaging, and you're all the experts in this too, so that we hope you can chime in and share some of the best practices that you're using as well. And as we know, our letters are what we do best. As high school counselors, we advocate for our students. That's what we wake up every day. That's our purpose. And then this letter is our opportunity to truly advocate for our students in a way that can shed light on insight about their life, their story, their why. It's so important to talk about our students' whys in these letters. I know for a lot of us in public high schools, if you were like me, I remember my first time in starting as a high school counselor, I had students coming in asking for this letter of recommendation for highly selective schools. And I thought to myself, wait, where was this in my training? What are they talking about? What are these letters that I'm supposed to be writing in this job of counseling? So it's so important to remember these are letters to advocate for their story. So we're hoping, and Eric will share more of that too. It's also so important to remember too that our letters matter. Tell your teachers their letters matter. They really can, as Eric will share later too, just push that piece that we need sometimes. And NACAC always puts out this great report. Show this to your teachers, show this to your parents. It's great for them. And students love seeing this as well, that where it does fall in that admissions decision.
And we will be focusing on the counselor recommendation in this webinar. Maybe we'll do a future one for teachers if that's helpful. But you know, a lot of this carries over for teachers, but we really are going to be focusing on the counselor recommendation.
Mm-hmm. And we'll touch too on some of the myths and legends that are out there as far as what counselors assume they should be writing or how much they should be writing. I think that's important as a takeaway today as well.
Yeah, so I just wanted to touch on character a bit to begin with. This is, some of you probably have seen this, but does it matter? And there's a resounding yes from college admission deans, and Eric can probably reinforce that. But the Character Collaborative, which is a group of, and the website's there below, it's a group of college, high school admission officers, counselors, different organizations like the Common App and the Character Lab at Penn and Challenge Success and a number of other organizations that have come together to really look at the issue of character and admission. And they partnered with NACAC in the admission trend survey to ask this question about, does it matter? And you know, you can read it there. 70% of admission deans deem character to be moderately to considerably important in the applicant's candidacy. And I would say now more than ever, I think this is growing. And as we look at the pandemic and the implications of test optional policies, they're really focusing on ethical character, and that kind of begs the question, so where do we find it? And again, we'll send this out, but and maybe I'll put this in the chat. I will put this in the chat a little later, some of these links, but this is, Making Caring Common has been doing a study over the last 3 years that has been funded by the Templeton Foundation that looked at character assessment in admission, and both on the high school side, looking at tools, and the college side, looking at tools they have for reviewing and assessing character. And the cliff notes are that there are not a lot of great assessments out there for capturing ethical character in a systematic way in a kind of high stakes environment like this in college admission. And so we can talk a little later in the discussion about kind of how colleges are looking at this and how they're finding evidence of it. But on the high school side, how do we measure character? Are there any really good ways to do it? The Enrollment Management Association has a tool called the Character Snapshot that they use in high school, independent high school admission, that tries to look at this. But it's really talking to teachers, talking to advisors, coaches, and soliciting feedback on the ways that students have demonstrated different non-cognitive abilities like persistence, like grit, like empathy, like caring kindness, and how they are in community, and really using the the council recommendation as a way to articulate that and explain that to colleges, because it doesn't show up, to be quite honest, in a lot of other ways in admission. So I am going to put this up here. This is the second Turning the Tide report that came out a year ago, March. And there's a link you can use there. This really looks at how high schools can promote ethical character and cultivate ethical character in admission, and how parents can as well. Is really the focus of this report. And it has some pretty set guideposts there. It will also link you to the website, which, just to go back for a second, this resource, this link down here, is a great guide for educators in high schools for how to kind of think about character and how to identify it and how to communicate it. So those are just a couple of resources as we look at how to frame out these issues with character within council recommendations.
So let's talk about some of our barriers we've had before, and then of course now added barriers since COVID that are just even today before this, talking about, how are we trying to start some of these letters when we're still trying to learn our students. And the biggest thing is we can't write a letter until we connect with our students. So what are some ways that we can go about connecting with them? We do have barriers, and sometimes just access to students within our buildings. There's a lot of us that have rules and regulations within our school buildings as to when we can get into the classrooms, when we can talk to students. So those are always internal barriers that we have within our school culture that we need to consider. But then also the main thing too is counselors, how are we taught to write? How are our teachers taught to write? And what are those ways that we can educate each other, share our resources, but then also really think about how you're building solutions within your school culture to break down some of these barriers, so that we're all collaborating together. I just did my teacher training a couple of weeks ago, and every year I'm just thrilled to see how teachers are willing, who've been writing for years, that are willing to try new things, to adapt when we say we're advocating for students. And then the barrier too, and the reality for a lot of counselors in large high schools. I'll be honest, I was in a large high school, had a lot of students, and I thought, well, maybe going to a smaller school might be a better avenue for me to be able to really know my students. There's still the same barriers. I'm one counselor for 370 students, and trying to still, and that's small considering a lot of other counselors that have even much larger caseloads. And then we're supposed to find time to write an effective letter on behalf of our student. That truly is a barrier. So identifying your barriers, and I'd love to know what some of your barriers are that probably I didn't mention, but it's always finding that solution and then the resources to improve that. So interviews, think of any touch point that you can have to get to know a student. I try and usually think of who can I talk to first that knows my student better than I do. And everybody in your building, custodial staff, kitchen staff, front office staff, coaches, art teachers, anybody you can think of that where this student spends their time. For a lot of my art and theater students, I know where I'm going to learn more about these students. And I think sometimes too, as counselors, we think that we need to spend 30, 40 minutes with a student to get to know them, when really just a few minutes here and there, if it's, obviously virtually, just have kids sign up for minute meetings. Just log in, let me just talk to you, not even see your face, but just let me hear and what you're doing, what you're active with. Minute meetings have been successful for me, But then also another idea that I've seen some schools do, and maybe Eric, you have feedback on the love or hate of this concept, but collaborative letter writing, especially again in some public schools when counselors there's a lot of shift and students are changing caseloads. Write a letter together where there's maybe a counselor that spent a few years with a student and knows them on a level that can advocate for their story as the new counselors just is shifting in, or sometimes it's our first counseling job and we're trying to get to know our seniors to write for them. Another, collecting data any way you can, parents, students, teachers, just any way that I know a lot of people use student surveys to capture, and we'll share later, using quotes from students themselves, using quotes from people in your building that you can capture and include within your letter of recommendation. So, and I hope that's, a myth that we can break down too, that the letter of rec does not have to be all your words. It does not have to be the stress and weight of what you as a counselor knows about this student, but there's so many creative ways that you can embed within the letter that can speak to the student's character, to their why, to how they're truly and where they're impacting their school or community.
Great. And some people are throwing some
ideas
in the chat that things like having students record a brief video that they can share with you about some of their strengths and things like that. Great ideas. And obviously the brag sheets and questionnaires and surveys and parent surveys are all great ways to reach out. Some folks who have smaller caseloads or smaller number of students send out a Google Doc with every senior's name on it to the faculty and staff, and just have people write in little anecdotes on a Google Doc or adjectives describing the student, just to give them kind of little tips. So please feel free to share some of these in the chat, and maybe we'll capture them and see if we can send those out later as well. Diane, do you want to talk a little bit about the writing process?
Sure. So let's just talk about, the getting started, and especially with COVID as well. I do want to just kind of shed some light to, that's really important to think about our students, especially where they are within the US, the world, and what they're facing. As we all know, 2020 is just a year like none other, but our students are facing things they have never before, just where we are politically, racial injustice, and the, fire, just so many unfortunate barriers our students are facing, huge strides of economical impact for our families. And speaking to those things on a level, but then, how do we go about starting this process? And a lot of it is, what have you done to brand and to educate everyone within your building how this letter of rec process happens? Identifying that within your counseling department. How many are we going to write? Who is going to write? Setting that up front so that it's less workload on everybody. But then, like we were mentioning, how are you going to gather information? If you're doing something well and effective, share it. If it's working for you, it's going to work for everybody else within your department and for your teachers. Our teachers, we get together and share out information, and that's very helpful. And then also making sure that all your resources are accessible for everybody in your building on a shared drive. A lot of teachers don't even know where that, where's this letterhead that I'm supposed to be using? And then the timeline, creating that so we're not missing deadlines. And then of course, just getting started, that blank page of an intimidating blank page of, oh my gosh, I need to write something now. How do I get started? The format we're going to share will definitely help you fill in the gaps of that. But just asking yourself some of those questions to get some ideas flowing. What's it like when the student isn't around? And I really love the last question on here, especially now in times. What is your student really doing to get along with others that have different beliefs of their own? We see so much, especially in my school, we are in person, and I'm seeing so much conversation around current events and how students are feeling about it, and if it's what they're doing with that energy. But then also, how do peers describe this other student? So just thinking about whatever you're doing to help generate some ideas before you're writing will help you feel better when you're preparing.
All right, Eric, we've let you quiet too long.
It's okay. So what I'm hoping to be able to do is give you a little bit of the perspective from the college side. And I've broken out into kind of 4 different areas. Just my general observations, things that are most helpful, things that are least helpful, and things that I find are missing that could be helpful to put in. So I'm just going to go through kind of each of the bullets. But, one of the questions I always get is how much time do you actually spend reading a letter of recommendation? And from working in 3 very different institutions, I can tell you that we take it seriously. That letter is essentially, no matter how detailed or not, an endorsement of you saying that this student is a good citizen, a great community member, or however else you want to describe them. So reading a letter of recommendation, it's as fast as we can read. I'm going to talk a little bit about length in just a couple of minutes. And I put this in here about how many letters are too many. And I say this for those of you that are advising teachers on how to write letters, but also when you're working with students on them saying, well, can I, Ms. Campbell, can I send 4 more teacher letters of recommendation, even though Brown only requires 2? Too many is usually anything more than another past what the requirement is. That's the general advice that I typically give students, is that if a school says that they want 2 letters, 1 from a teacher, 1 from your counselor, and they want to send 1 additional one, typically the answer is always going to be fine, especially for those schools that read applications in a holistic sense. More than that, you might start to get people skimming letters a little bit too quickly. And I also want to give the kind of assurance that we are very understanding about caseloads and resources that you have available to you. I specifically not only work with students in schools within places like Northern New England, but I also work very heavily in Southern California, where caseloads are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students to 1 counselor. And so I think that especially in those situations, there's a concern that you're not going to be as detailed as you want to, and we would never hold that against you nor the student. Really understanding that context is super important for us. I would also say that in cases where you might not have as much to say because you don't know the student as well, the Common App secondary school report form, Common App is what we use, but it's helpful in just us getting some of the basics, answering some of the questions. Maybe your school utilizes the checkbox system, maybe your school doesn't, but that's also another way for us to be able to get some baseline information, especially for those of you that feel like you don't have the ability or the time to be able to really, really get to know a student. So in terms of what's most helpful in a recommendation, and I typically see these in most letters anyway, but this is just to kind of reaffirm. The first thing is rigor, relationship, and extraordinary factors. So rigor, in a case where you might be working with the student and you're also heavily working with them on their course selection, this might be an opportunity for you to talk a little bit more about their rigor and what they've encountered and how they've progressed throughout the course of their academic career. For those of you that aren't involved in course selection or academic advising, we wouldn't necessarily expect that, but that could be helpful information that you could include. Contextualizing your relationship is very, very helpful. I find in the first couple of sentences, when you say, I have known Brennan for his entire 4 years of high school and I've met with him every week for 4 years, that contextualizes to me that you probably know Brennan really, really well. If you say, I've only met with them twice, once with their parents and once in our senior meeting, and that's all I have to go on, that helps contextualize this as well for us. And extraordinary factors, I think people get really caught up in trying to regurgitate a resume. And while we get that information through other parts of the application, extraordinary factors could be things that are really elevating the student or setting them apart from one another. This could be they've been student body president for 2 years, or they did the most community service hours within the school community. That might be an activity or something to highlight. In the era of varsity blues, I would say that there are schools that are looking to other places of the application to verify extraordinary factors that students are claiming for themselves. And so it's very helpful for us to see in your letter of recommendation, kind of a verification almost of what the student is saying is actually indeed true. And again, information not found anywhere else. Context of the student in relation to their peers is helpful. This is also, this is something that people might be able to do relatively easily or not, depending upon how in tune you are to their academic journey and academic record. For instance, you could say that Diane consistently performs in the top 10% of all of her classes in relation to her peers, or this is an extraordinarily talented senior class this year, and the top 25 students in the class have their GPAs bunched up on top of each other. So any kind of academic context in relation to the peers you could give would be super helpful. And also your honesty is very, very helpful as well. Understanding you can't always say exactly what you want to, you can place kind of little nuggets in the application, or just check that box on the secondary school report form that says you would like a follow-up call. We always look at that. So in terms of the least helpful, so this is, I'm not saying that it's wrong to do this, but I think that your space and your energy and time could be better spent on other parts of the letter than these, because we can get them anywhere else. So information that's present on the profile, unless you're calling out a specific program or initiative in your school, typically us as most schools read by region, so we are very familiar already most of the time with the nuances of your school and your offerings. So if a student did like an innovation project, and that is a program that you have at your school in lieu of certain classes in senior year, feel free to call that out. If your school stopped offering AP courses recently or a couple of years ago, call that out. But don't feel like you need to completely replicate information on the profile in your letter, unless it is, again, something that specifically should need to be called out. I already kind of talked about the regurgitation of the resume versus the verifying of compelling accomplishments. This is not to say that that's something that you have to do every single time. But again, if there are unique or very kind of high level compelling traits or accomplishments of the student, it might be good to throw that in there. Hyperbole, I heard one counselor talk about, term it as poetic fluff one time. A letter written to impress all but the intended reader. And what I mean by that is I will occasionally get more than 2-page single space 10-point font letters of recommendation that are just dense with hyperbole. And it gets to a point where it goes right over us as readers, our heads sometimes. And when we're trying to get through volume and get to know a student, pull out the most salient points of a student's candidacy, sometimes the important points get clogged up in a lot of that hyperbole I see.
And Eric's pretty tall, so not a lot goes over his head.
Not much, not much. The other thing that's least helpful is if you're advising teachers, teachers sometimes have the tendency, not widely, but I would say maybe 20% of the time I read a teacher rec, the entire first half is filled with their personal background, their education, their qualifications, things of the sort, unless it is critical for the context of the class and us needing to know maybe the level of difficulty of a class. I would encourage teachers to not feel like they need to spend the first huge chunk of that space talking about themselves. It does happen. An example where I think it could be appropriate is if a student is applying as a physics major to a school, and the physics teacher is writing a letter, and that physics teacher is a retired college professor of 30 years at UCLA. That might be some helpful information to help us say, okay, so the student's probably going through a very, very rigorous course, but you can lean away from it. And then the last part, what's often missing, again, what we're talking about, character and citizenship traits within the school community. I think we've covered that. I want to really push Diane's point about these informal observations. I saw in the chat some people say when you have the opportunity, you try to get out of your office and into the dining area or the hallways as much as you can. Little pieces of the letter that stick out to me would say, I always see the student hold the door for every faculty member that walks to the school. Or I always see them befriending the student that tends to be a loner in a class, or anything that might help us get a sense of that character in those little informal observations. I think people are afraid to talk about weaknesses. I like to call them areas of growth. We don't expect that they're fully formed humans at 17 and 18, so absolutely feel free to talk about areas where you think that they can improve, because it helps us make a determination if we can support that and help cultivate that a little bit more. And that last point I would say is a note to call you. If you really want to either, I wouldn't say strongly, yeah, I would say if you want to strongly advocate for the student because they are a cut above or there's something else, there's something special, you can include a note to specifically call you or send an email to your admission representative. If there's a concern you want to express that you cannot do in writing, you definitely want to shoot us an email and we can have a conversation offline that's not actually in writing. And that happens a fair amount. It's really a great way for admission representatives and counselors to be able to forge a relationship with each other.
And Eric, I see a question being asked frequently about, is it okay for counselors to mention how long they've worked with the student? And I think, again, just reiterating that context is critical to say, like, this is my first time as a counselor. It's my first time in this school. I remember my first year here, it was a lot of my letter. I'm still trying to learn my school and these students, any context. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I would,
because I think people are concerned that it's gonna impact the student's candidacy.
I would also say for those of you that might feel that you just haven't had the time to get to know a student or spend as much time with brag sheets or in meetings with them, especially if you have students that are working with college access organizations and those organizations might know them over a longer period of time. A lot of those organizations do write letters, and the counselor will attach that letter to like the secondary school report form. In a lot of cases, they might know the student better or have worked with them in a much more deeper capacity. We would love to get those. We're totally fine getting college access organization letters as well.
And I do want to just address one question, and we'll get to a lot of these questions at the end. So if you want to hold off on some of your questions, but there was a question about what you meant by check boxes, and that is on the, for those who are new to the profession, that's on the Common App and other school report forms. Basically, check boxes saying having counselors check off kind of how certain traits and things like that about students, and how are they the best the best in their career, or how they demonstrate those different attributes. And some schools don't allow counselors to fill out those check boxes, and others do. So we can come back to that issue at the end too. So I do want to leave a bunch of time for questions at the end, and we do want to get into the bullet point narrative letters, and we could talk a long time about why we do these and what the benefits are. When I started at Dairyfield in 2008, I brought these to Dairyfield because I had been a college admission officer. And I just realized how little time I had to dig into these long letters. And I had been a college counselor before I did some work in admission, and had put hours and hours into writing these soliloquies about each student, and these 1 to 2 page narratives about students. And it all got lost on me as a college admission officer. And I really wanted to be able to dig into the meat of who the student is and what makes them tick. And so I started using these bullet points, and we'll get in, and both Diane and I will share examples in a second. But they are beneficial in a whole bunch of ways. And Eric has been a huge fan of these. And I've also had a number of other college admission officers from all over the country kind of send people my way to say, could you share this with them, because this would be really useful for people. And before I started using them at Dairyfield, I actually spent the whole fall meeting with college admission reps and college admission deans, and sharing with them a draft of what our bullet point might look like, just to kind of vet it through folks. And there was not one person that said, don't use this. People were really supportive of it. So I would just say that it's a time saver in terms of efficient use of time. It allows you to, a lot of times we don't have a dedicated, hour or two to sit down and write one recommendation, and we need to come back to it from time to time. And the bullet point format allows you to do that. You can fill out a section. Also, if something happens with a student, and either positively or negatively during the fall, you can easily enter in some of those things to the rec. You can add to it without trying to fit it in between things. And it also allows college admission deans to look at the letter, and oftentimes by the time they reach our counselor letter, they've read the application, they've read the essay, they've read other parts of the application. And so a lot of it's redundant. A lot of our letters are redundant, and the bullet point format allows deans to really dive into the areas that they have yet to have enough information on, and focus on that. It also allows folks, when they go into committee work, to bring up in front of everyone a recommendation letter, or reference a recommendation letter, and point to it really quickly, and not have to weed through paragraphs and paragraphs. I don't know, Diane, do you want to say anything more generally before we jump into the specifics?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been around for a long time, and I still think that what I love about it is it's shifted the mindset from the intimidation, stressful letter writing to you're really, it's a, format that you're filling in the blanks almost. So I love that. And I think when counselors start to use it, it does feel awkward. Here's just an example of one that I use, but I love the flexibility around it. These are just the ones that most counselors typically use, or the one that's most widely shared. I see some chats and questions about, will you share letters? Absolutely. I'll send out all kinds of letters that I've written. But what I love around it is I change those section headers all the time. If I'm writing specifically for, the Cameron Impact Scholarship, a couple of my for Colorado counselors, if you're writing to the Betcher, especially others in the Rocky Mountain region, Daniels Fund, just any, or even a school that might have specific areas that it matches with their philosophy of their campus or an area, change those headings around whatever you're writing to. So I love the flexibility around it. My teachers use this. They really enjoy it. So then it kind of gives you an area to be flexible and change, and you're filling in those areas. The student reflection section is where I do use quotes from students, but again, sometimes I change that around a quote or reflection from someone else in the building that has shared something with me about that student. And especially if you have a student who's really just has a huge impact within the community, you can change that. I have a COVID template that I'm working with as well, just saying, what was virtual learning like for them? What challenges did they face, or maybe what successes did they have? A lot of our students have, adapted to new hobbies and the like. So I have a little section of that as well, but that's just an example. So we could definitely share that. Yes, I will share that COVID template.
Great. And then here's just, I kind of tried to fit it into the slides, so it's a little changed, but this is a look at the way our recommendations are kind of structured. And then I'll kind of show an overview on the next slide. But really, a lot of people worry about the switching to a bullet point because, what about that story that I always love to start my recommendation with? And this retains that. And so under distinctive qualities, there's a narrative paragraph, maybe 3 or 4 sentences that just it allows you to tell that story, gives a really kind of distilled down snapshot of the student, and then it breaks it up, as you can see, by different areas, their academic interests and their history, when they started at your school, their curriculum. This gives you, for those who don't do the check boxes again, this gives you a place to kind of articulate how rigorous a course program is. This student is one of only a handful of students who have earned highest honors all through high school. Or this is a student who, if you have APs, is an AP scholar or a national merit commended student, or whatever it might be. But and also, these are some of the interests they have academically. These are some of the things they've done maybe over the summer to pursue academic interests. Same thing with activities and interests. And again, not just regurgitating what's they're putting on their common application, right? Not just saying, they did varsity softball for 4 years, but trying to get beneath it a little and share anything you might have about their role on that team, how they impacted things. And these are just 1-sentence snapshots. Some personal history or family community context. This really allows you to get into some of the issues that I think we really are concerned about communicating around context and around family contributions, and in order to level the playing field. I mean, that this student is working a full-time job or a half-time job to help support their family, or this student is helping care for a sick relative or a younger sibling every day. And this is especially true during COVID. And so really, this is a first-generation college student, really allowing us to dig into some of the context there. And then a summary paragraph, just kind of summing up, just kind of snapshot. And then some schools use this, some don't, but if you have teacher comments that teachers have shared with you, or that, from report cards and things like that, sometimes it's useful just to grab a few notable ones and throw them in there. So, sorry. This is what the letter looks like. And yes, it is 2 pages, but with the bullet points, it gives you.
You broke the rule, Brennan.
Yeah, it gives you a little room for sneaking it in there, because they can really jump around. This link, and again, once I stop sharing my screen, I'll put some of these links in the chat. But this link here is part of the coming out of that Making Caring Common assessment work that I mentioned at the beginning. There is a guide that was developed for colleges about how to identify different non-cognitive attributes in students, and how they might think about, as a college admission office, assessing those. And part of that was this resource for high schools to write character conscious letters of recommendation. And you can, with this link, you can kind of click, and there's a template, and it kind of walks you through, if you're new to this, all the different things that you might think about. It's not all inclusive, but many of the things you might think about in writing the recommendation. So that's all in there. And so that will be sent out. I'll put it in the chat, and when you get this from registering, it'll be there.
I think that's the beauty of this too, Brennan, with this format. And hopefully counselors know and understand there's so much freedom and autonomy within the letter writing. I think more than we realize as counselors, that there's so much disparity between how letters are written or who has time. And I know that can create some angst for some counselors as we post our I'm writing letters, on our Instagram posts of the hours on weekends. But this format truly gives you flexibility to do it however you want to advocate for your student. And that's what's perfect. as you adapt to that format.
Eric, do you want to just weigh in on the bullet point from the college perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, and how, if you want to go bullet, if you want to keep it the traditional paragraph way, it's whatever works for you. It's whatever works for your school. A couple of people were asking, does universities accept the bullet narrative? From every single person I've ever talked to, they don't have a preference. They're not going to hold it against or for your student if you use a bullet narrative. What's helpful for me is that when we are trying to get through volume in a short amount of time, it's helpful to pull out key pieces of information. But what's even more helpful is that for schools that have a committee process, which many do, many people are looking at this application that haven't done a full read on it. So they're kind of going through and perusing. I should do this because it's all electronically instead, but they need to be able to pull out key things. And if we have a question of, their background wasn't clear or specific academic progression wasn't clear, you can go into that letter and it's very easy to be able to pull it out right then and there. Again, thinking about the volume and people that haven't done full reads on these, but they're just seeing them in a committee.
Great, thank you. All right, so just conscious of everyone's time, and I know we're all busy in the fall. I see people putting their emails in for the template. Somebody shared this earlier, and here's that link will take you right to the template. And we will send this out, the presentation out to everyone. But let's have people use the chat to enter in some of your questions.
There's a good question right there about the headers. Are they actually included on the letter? Yes, you include that letter and write that narrative piece or even bullet some points to that header within that application. Right. And writing within that.
And I keep my headers consistent through all the recs, but like Diane was saying, for some of her recs, she does change the headers, or for different purposes, she does change the headers. So,
yeah, and especially if you work with students, like if you're Key Club advisor or student council advisor, or if you work with your students in any other setting within your high school, that can also be a header of another area that you have connections with them.
I just want to address, I think it's Callie who wrote, what tips do you have for writing for kids who aren't standout? Good kids, but they haven't really made an impact. I think that's a lot of people. That was me probably at 17 as well. And so I can understand the trying to like get excited about someone that might just be like, fine. And being fine, by the way, is fine. And so I think something that Diane mentioned was that like collaborative writing. I also know when I read some letters, I get a lot of kind of quotes or information that counselors will put in from the teachers that they know the student a lot better. So they might say, Johnny's English teacher said that he really shined when, insert example. And so you can feel free to kind of source quotes or anecdotes from other people or other teachers that you might know. It is amazing how many school administrative assistants that run like the school counseling and the college guidance offices have a good relationship and can tell you a little bit more about those students, because they're the ones that are constantly like coming in, making appointments and handing off paperwork and such. And so I've actually heard counselors ask their administrative assistants to chime in on that student as well in like these informal interactions. And so we are totally fine with you sourcing information from other people within the school and inserting those quotes within your letter.
Hey, Eric, this is a question that maybe you can address that Elizabeth put in the chat that, do you expect the format from, and I know you read by high school often, and a lot of schools do, do you expect the format to be similar for every counselor? Is that easier for you as you read?
You know what? It's not really about what's easier for me. Sometimes it is about how you can best write for the student within the limited amount of time that you have to do this. And so if for Diane, it works really well to do bullets, and then for Brendan, he wants to do paragraphs, go for it.
And then while we have you, there's also a question about the those rankings and the checkboxes and things on the secondary school report on the Common App form. And, do you have a strong preference for whether counselors and teachers fill them out?
No, a lot of this is dependent upon school policy. I'm seeing them used less and less frequently over the years. I'd say 10 years ago, a lot of people were doing them. And then lately I'm seeing a bit of a decline in that. I think it's up to you. I think that the overall recommendation I think counselors have on the Common App, that's like enthusiastically, strongly, fairly strongly, that if you're trying to tell us something without telling us something, and you do what we call down check a little bit more on that, like if you do a fairly strongly, that'll catch us to say like, okay, they want to tell us something, so maybe I need to pick up the phone and call them, or they just couldn't put something in writing. So we'll pick up on that cue.
And I'll just add that we don't, at our school, we don't do the ratings and check boxes, but at Making Caring Common, this is one of the things we're working on is recommendations and kind of intending this year to do kind of a deeper dive into what would make more effective recommendations, especially around issues of character and things like that. But instead of doing the rankings, we make sure that information is kind of is in the recommendation in different ways. So, in a summary paragraph, I might say something like, I enthusiastically recommend the student for admission, or I might say something like that, or I might, one of the things on the Common App, I think, asks for some 3 adjectives or something that describe a student. So I'm going to make sure I get that information into the recommendation in different ways, even though it's not necessarily through the secondary school report.
There's a question from Rhonda on here about what would you like to see on the letter or profile about life under COVID as it pertains to students. I think it is entirely okay. If you have the ability to put it in your profile, I think it's helpful. But otherwise, you can have like, I'm seeing some schools do like a standard paragraph or standard statement that they're putting like as part of the header. So it's just part of every single letter. And it just gives us the basics. Like, we are remote learning for fall of 2020. Every student got opportunity for a pass-fail grade in spring of 2020. Just anything quick that is helpful for us, because as we start to read and enter committee, when I open up a school grouping committee, the first thing someone's going to ask is, all right, what's the deal with this school and this community for this year? If your school or in your community was really affected in a way that was very much out of the norm, not to sound morbid, but there are schools where teachers are not returning this year for unfortunate reasons. And if there was something of that significant nature, that is helpful for us just to know as well, because we want to be sensitive to what has happened in your community.
Yeah, and we're doing that. We're putting a kind of a cover page on our profile that's just a kind of COVID update, and it says what our policies were, what they are this fall, and what the general impact. But then also, if there is a student that you're aware of that has been significantly impacted by COVID, parent lost a job, sick relative, whatever it might be, to really work that into some of the bullet points and make sure you emphasize that.
And I've included that within ours because even though we are in person, we still have a lot of families who have chosen to attend virtually because we've given families that option. So just in that context of knowing what our students are doing. So much flexibility. I love all the chats and sharing. It's great. And I think that's the biggest thing that hopefully we all come away with. It is, we're all trying to learn this together, and there is no perfect right way. We're trying to write letters and our seniors are trying to write essays. So we're all in pain together.
I would also just kind of say that a counselor recommendation is not going to be the reason a student isn't admitted to a school. So I don't want you to be sitting up at night thinking, oh my God, that could have really or that was the reason why they didn't get into that school. Not usually the case. Again, please remember that us as admission officers, we're humans too. We have people in our family that are educators and teachers, and we have a front row seat to how challenging it can be. And so that's why contextualizing that interaction and that relationship and that depth with the student as we start to read it is really, really helpful. Because, you know, if you're one of my counselors in San Diego who has 600 students and you got to write a letter for all 600 students, I might not even expect a letter, and that is entirely okay.
Right.
And I'll just add, and then we'll wrap up because I know people are kind of jumping to other meetings. But you know, we released a statement this summer from Making Caring Common. It was signed by I think 375 or more mission deans throughout the country, called "Caring Counts in Crisis," and it was really those admission deans saying, you know what, we get it. You know, we understand that everybody's going through this. We understand, and it was more focused to students, but to say, you know what, this is not a time when you should be, you need to be gentle on yourselves. And we understand about testing. We understand about pass fail in the spring. We understand about all these things, and we get it. So.
And we're redefining our jobs, all of us. We're redefining our jobs, and we're needing to write these letters. So that forgiveness and that grace is needed more than ever.
Absolutely. And I'll just end by saying, first of all, thanks to Eric and Diane, but also thank you to all of you. I find myself every day so grateful for the community of really amazing professionals with whom we work. And it's one of the things that lifts me up in these times. And it's a lot of work, but it's important work. So
agreed. Thank you all.
And enjoy your fall. Be well, stay well.
Yeah.